Today let's talk about the pagan gods of East Slavs, what happened to them once Christianity took over, and what lower mythology creatures exist in the culture to this day.
Сидит на перине, считает полтины, мы кому поем, мы тому с добром, правда сбудется, да не минуется, не минуется, не минуется.
What do we know about East Slavic mythology? Admittedly not that much, and there might be reasons for it. Today I'm going to talk about the high mythology, the pantheon of Slavic gods and such, but also the lower mythology, the spirits and the creatures, your Leshy, your Domovoy, your mermaids, your witches, your vampires, and jumping ahead, those latter ones are much better studied. Pagan gods we know embarrassingly little about. They were more or less eradicated these few centuries after Christianization, while the lower mythology creatures survived basically to this day as part of folklore. So when we talk about high mythology, there are precious few facts, and then some assumptions, some comparative analysis, and basically guesswork that has researchers fighting to this day. But brief history lesson before we get started. Today we're focusing on East Slavs, your current-day Central Russia, Belarus, and the Ukraine, and people have occupied these territories for a very long time. However, their formation as the Slavic people happened around 5th century AD, rather late by comparison to your Greeks and your Romans, and that unfortunately put them at a slight disadvantage, knowledge preservation-wise. The formation of the first East Slavic state occurs around 9th century with the rule of Oleg the Wise, coming to a certain pinnacle in the 10th to 11th century with the rule of Vladimir, and I'm obviously talking about Kievan Rus. Rus was in its feudal period, so Kievan Principality was not the only one in the region. Novgorod, for example, was another strong one, but at a certain point all of these territories were under rule of Kiev. Whether girls can at least see what they're pointing at. But while these regions were fighting amongst themselves, like your German states, for example, what's important here are two things. First, these people first started seeing themselves as one Slavic people, and two, Kiev became a political power. I brought up Vladimir. Vladimir is important for our tale today, as he was at the helm of Kievan Rus becoming a powerful state. And he did one important thing amongst others. He realized that he wanted to trade, predominantly with the Byzantine Empire, and to sit at the big boy table he needed to do one thing, and that was to become monotheistic. And so Vladimir, who previously brought the pagan idols and installed them in Kiev, decided to become Christian, and for Kievan Rus to become Christian as well, Christian Orthodox in specific. There is this tale of him bringing all of the Kiev citizens to the Dnieper River and baptizing them all at once. It was likely less cinematic and less dramatic than that. However, 988 is the date of the Christianization of Rus, commonly referred to as baptism of Rus, and so the great battle between church and the pagan rituals began. If you look at this map here, you can see that Rus, even at the time, was a big state, not as big as Russia today, but big nevertheless, and not as densely populated. So the reach of the church was not that great at the time. The priests couldn't reach all of these remote villages all at once, and so the pagan rituals and worships continued. But even in big population centers, they still persevered, as the people were not that happy to give them up. And so for like 2 to 3 centuries, a period of dual belief continued, where both the old pagan rituals were performed as well as the new Christian ones. Because for the random villager, it's better safe than sorry, really. This new priest tells him all about Jesus and how great of a guy he was, but at the same time, the villager also liked sacrificing to Perun, so he might as well just do that and not anger the old gods. Best case scenario for the church at the time was actually co-optation and adaptation, so a lot of pagan gods and some rituals got incorporated into the Christian rituals and some of the saints' lore. Most obviously something like Maslenitsa that is celebrated to this day, a very pagan holiday that is this week before the Great Lent, but I will get to it in a little bit. This period of dual belief continued until the Mongol invasion of Rus in the 13th century. This is the clearest point of delineation because the Mongols essentially destroyed everything in their wake, and that included the old pagan worship sites as well as the new churches. So everything that's been built afterwards, like the new Christian churches, they were already built differently without trying to appeal to old pagan sensibilities as they might have done before. And that's actually a good segue to talking about the greatest problem about talking about Slavic mythology is that we have no records of it. All idols, all totems were destroyed either by the church or the Mongols, and nobody bothered at the time to write down the myths of the Slavs. Part of the problem is that we're not even sure if Slavs had a writing system before the introduction of the Glagolic script in the 9th century. They probably did. There are some references to a script reminiscent of Nordic runes used in Novgorod and such, but we have no first-hand evidence. But even the Glagolic script, it roughly coincides with Christianization, so everything written down is written down by the grace of God. No. Christianity is the official religion, so it's obviously a priority, so nobody bothers to write down the pagan gods before they're gone. But these same priests and chroniclers to the rescue, actually, because they were preaching against these pagan gods in their worship, so they also wrote down what you're not supposed to pray to. So at least we have some names and some characteristics from these chronicles, but not nearly enough. I will try to stick to the facts and reliable historians in this video, but it's obviously not my specialty area, so I might get some stuff wrong. Sorry about that. Let's get to the gods. And started Vladimir to rule over Kiev alone, and placed he the idols on the hill outside of the palace walls. Perun made of wood with silver hair and golden mustache, and horse, and dashbok, and stribok, and seagull, and regel, and mokish. And they worshipped demons and desecrated the Russian land, escorting their sons and daughters to the hill. The church of St. Basil stands there now. This comes from one of the few surviving records of the time period, and it actually gives us most information on the gods. You see how dire the situation actually is? Perun, the first one on the list, with some level of physical description to him, is also the one that we know most about. He is also mentioned in other documents of the time period, as well as notes from travelers that came to Rus at the time. As we can see, he had silver hair, so likely an older man in appearance with grey hair, and he also was the god of thunder. It is supported by some written evidence as well as etymology. The word Perun was synonymous with thunderbolts and lightning in Russia up until the 19th century, and is still used in some parts of Belarus and Ukraine. Like many other gods of thunder, Perun was a patron of warriors. That's probably why he was Vladimir's favorite, and the animal associated with him is the bull. There are some records of sacrifices of bulls to appease Perun, and even later when Saint Ilya, or Elijah if you will, accumulated some of the Perun's traits, there are notes of pseudo-sacrifices of calves to Ilya to get good weather, and that's centuries later. Saint Ilya was actually imagined as riding a flaming carriage across the sky, throwing flaming arrows down, and that's how you get lightning and thunder. Perun essentially did the same thing before him, just likely without a carriage. Those pagan gods had a better work ethic, if you ask me. Since we cannot be sure what that pantheon of gods actually looked like, we simply assume that Perun was the ruler of other gods, similar to Zeus, or it could simply be that Vladimir viewed him as his patron god, and that's why he was at the top of that list. That didn't help Perun all that much. Some 8 years after his installment on top of that Kiev hill, he got taken down, beaten by gods, and dragged down and thrown into the Dnieper River because Vladimir got baptized into Christianity. Vladimir ordered his warriors to escort the Perun totem down the river so that people don't actually fish him out, because obviously the people wept for their fallen god. This was obviously a performative ritual to signify this renouncement of the old pagan gods, but I also love the interpretation that notes that Vladimir, he got baptized for political reasons first, so he probably still loved his Perun god. So him sending the totem down the river was essentially him giving Perun a Viking funeral, or a warrior's funeral at the very least. Love that. As far as surviving myths involving Perun, there's evidence pointing to one of Perun fighting a grand snake. All these old gods have a myth attached to them of them fighting some sort of chthonic evil, sometimes coming from the underworld, sometimes it is something that existed in this world, but a terrifying creature nonetheless. And in this part of the world, it was most likely a huge snake. We can say with some level of certainty that such myth existed of Perun defeating this grand snake once and for all and granting peace to the people, even though we don't have anything concrete to say about it. This myth, however, was misattributed to Perun fighting a different god, called Veles. Veles, or Volos, is not mentioned as part of Vladimir's pantheon, and there might be a reason for it. We know for sure that such god existed, although there is some conflicting evidence as to what type of god he actually was. Some associate him with the animals and the cattle, in some sense juxtaposing him to Perun, where Perun is the patron of warriors, Veles is the patron of peasants and farmers, the two main occupations of the time period. Veles is often described as being very hairy and very furry, and his spirit animal is the bear. At the same time, Veles carries some traits that make him the god of the dead, the god of the underworld, and so his statue would be put not with the rest of the gods on top of the hill, but right under the hill. If you know, Kiev sits on a hill, so the statue of Veles would have been put closer to the river. But Veles being associated with the underworld brought this image of Veles as this grand snake and Perun fighting him. That claim is disputed, mostly because the gods of the time period, they rarely fight to the death, amongst themselves that is. Look at the Greek gods, they squabble, but they mostly use heroes and humans to settle those disputes, and they only fight the titans, an outside force. So it is unlikely that Perun and Veles fought, and if they did, it was not that grand fight of Perun with the great evil. Also, an image of Veles as a hairy snake is rather humorous, don't you think? As the time went on and the period of dual belief continued, Veles' traits got consumed by St. Nicholas and St. Vlasy. St. Vlasy, for example, became the patron saint of livestock animals well into the 19th century. And then come the gods that we know even less about. There's this weird one called Horse, not from English horse, but rather Iranian, and that's why we assume that he's somehow connected to the sun. But at the same time, Dashbog is also the god of sun, while Svarog is the god of heavenly fire, so maybe closer to the Greek Hephaestus. Are they all the same god, or is there some difference that we don't know about? I read a paper that tried to find these subtle differences between them, but at the same time I read a different one where they said that Horse and Dashbog are essentially the same thing. It's just that they had two names because Rus at the time had a huge Iranian community and they brought Horse along with them. I cannot tell you which one is more plausible. But in the same vein, there is Simargl, and we have nothing on him beyond linguistics guesses and etymology. And that's because in Iranian, there exists this magical bird called Simurg. So we assume that Simargl was also a big bird. Or maybe it's simply the same thing, that Simurg and Vladimir was just honoring that Iranian community. Stribog is normally attached to the winds and the skies. In the tale of Igor's campaign, the winds are called Stribog's grandchildren. Etymology also points us in the direction of Stribog being the god of the skies. The only female god, called Mokosh, also varying descriptions for her. Some tie her to fertility, because why not, she's a woman. Others mostly associate her with these womanly chores like spinning and knitting, things like that. That might actually make her the goddess of destiny, because spinning is often the metaphor and the imagery used to describe life and destiny. Think of 3 Moiras or 3 fates in the Greek mythology.
The thread won't cut.
We know that Mokosh's traits were taken over by Saint Paraskeva, and her day is Friday, same as Mokosh's, and that's the same day where women were not supposed to do anything around the house, especially spinning. Women were, in general, encouraged to put their work away at the end of the day, otherwise Mokosh or Paraskeva will come and finish your work for you, but that would also mean your soon death. That custom of Friday being the rest day for women survived for a very long time. And that's about it, gods-wise. Not much, is it? And because there is so little, it leaves a lot of room not only for speculation, but also for falsifications. You might have heard of such gods as Lel, or Yrila, or Chernobog even. Lel, for sure, is an 18th century invention and has nothing to do with real mythology, even though some people will swear that they've been celebrating him for generations upon generations. It's a little bit more complicated with Yrila. Yrila is more likely a personification of the spring festivities where Slavs celebrated the start of the new field season. It normally included some dancing, some chanting, some debauchery, and burying of a dummy called Yrila in the ground to fertilize the soil. Similar rituals occurred at the end of the season after the harvest to prepare the ground for sleep. And so we have a few of these images, Yrila, Kostroma, even Maslenitsa. They were these dummies or dolls dressed up, carried around the village, and then promptly buried, or in the case of Maslenitsa, burned. Maslins is actually the last surviving holiday like that, completely co-opted by the church as this week before the Great Lent, but at the same time, Maslins is still burned in the town square. But also keep in mind that these rituals are very, very old, and they are rooted in this belief of us being able to communicate with the land of the dead and the dead ancestors. For example, one of the main staples of Maslins, bliny, these thin pancakes that we eat, they used to be served at funerals. So Maslins still carries a lot of this pagan imagery and pagan rituals in it, even if it is essentially a Christian holiday now. But back to Yrila and this type of characters, he was likely not a god in a way that Biron was, maybe a smaller deity, or simply a ritual character to signify spring and rebirth of nature. Gods like Chernobog are also a little bit of a problem. You might have heard of him. He was in that He Who Must Not Be Named novel American Gods. And so he, along with his supposed antipode Belobog, are sometimes listed as East Slavic gods. Chernobog is literally black god, while Belobog is white god. These two feature in the West Slavic tales, but they are not part of the East Slavic pantheon that we're talking about today. One thing to mention that is important in general is that the pagan gods of the time period, they were never truly good or bad. They're all bad, really. If you sacrifice a goat to your god, he might be benevolent to you. If you don't, then he will not be. But they were not good or bad by default. So this contraposition of Chernobog versus the Belobog as good and bad is a little bit sus for the time period. And one last thing to mention before we move on to the lower mythology, and that's probably the biggest forgery that exists as far as Slavic mythology is concerned, and it's the so-called Book of Veles. A man called Miralubov claimed that a man called Isenbek, when fleeing from the commies in the beginning of the 20th century, found these wooden boards in one of the houses that listed all of this previously unknown information about the Slavic mythology. And in the US, Miralubov got his hands on them, photographed them, translated them, and promptly lost the original boards. Researchers are now united in that it is a forgery. Simply on linguistics alone, it is written as if somebody from the Roman Empire started talking modern French. But the Book of Veles got adopted by the neo-pagans, as it obviously has a lot more information on the Slavic mythology, even though it's all fake. And now to much better preserved and surviving low mythology, with its vampires, its witches, and its Domovoy. This part of mythology, sometimes called demonology, is a lot more better researched, mostly because it survived well into the 20th century, if not the 21st, but also the studies of it also started in the 18th century, so we can actually see the transformation and evolution of these characters, as well as we have records of creatures that no longer exist in the public eye. With these creatures, we see a lot more regional diversity. While the same principal characters pop up pretty much everywhere in the central Russia, Belarus, and the Ukraine, their names start to change quite a bit. And maybe the creature's function can be different in different regions, and maybe a creature does not exist in some parts at all. In order to have some structure here, let's tentatively break them into three groups. The creatures that live with the humans in their settlements, 2, the creatures of the wild, and 3, the undead and or human magic users. These categories are vague and broad at the best of times. There is some leeway in placing any particular creature in the category. For example, somebody like Vodyanoy could be potentially a creature of the wild or the undead, depending on how you approach him, so cut me some slack here. Vocation versus location, I guess. Where do you want to start? Let's start inside. Prehistoric people had a lot of their beliefs defined by death and the belief in the underworld. For instance, they believed that the dead can communicate with us and potentially help us or even harm us. I touched on this briefly when I talked about the fairy tales, as fairy tales do translate those beliefs quite well, but also in mythology. In mythology, for example, a lot of those beliefs got distilled into a creature called Domovoy. Domovoy, from the word dom, house, is most often depicted as the small man covered in fur or hair who lives in the house, mostly on or behind the stove, sometimes in the cellar or the attic. Domovoy represents these dead ancestors, and he is the master and protector of the house. Derived from his function is his behavior. He is the master protector of the house, so he keeps an eye that everything is in place and in order, both in literal sense, like everything is put in its place, but also in a metaphorical sense, like he doesn't like when family members fight. And if something is wrong or not to his standard, he starts misbehaving. Domovoy comes out at night and he starts making noise, maybe hiding things, breaking stuff. Sometimes he messes up your hair or throws off your blanket, small mischief like that. If that happens, you need to apologize to him, make everything right, and maybe leave him a small offering of food as an apology. Domovoy also looks after the stables and the livestock. In some tales, there is a separate creature called Dvorovoy from Dvor Yard that fulfills that role, but same difference really. Domovoy looks after the animals, and if you say bring a new horse and it starts withering away, that means that the Domovoy didn't like it all that much. He's peculiar like that. Domovoy also has another function or ability, if you will, and that's his ability to see the future. If he foresees a great trouble for the family, he starts wailing or banging doors. Or, for example, if he foresees the death of a family member, he might appear to you wearing his hat. If he sees good things ahead, he starts dancing and laughing in the hallways, which is just as creepy if you ask me. If the family relocates, they're supposed to take their Domovoy along with them. There are some tales of villagers in the 20th century relocating to the big cities and taking their Domovoy along with them to their new apartments. Those Domovoys must have been pissed. An apartment is a definite downgrade from a village house for them.
Так. Эх, не по-нашему люди жить стали.
Не по-нашему.
Этак вы скоро по миру пойдете.
Кто?
But also, if you relocate to a new house and the previous family didn't take their Domovoy with them, that Domovoy might actually be quite dangerous to you. And your Domovoy will fight him in the stables, and you're supposed to root and cheer for him. Needs to be mentioned that the image of Domovoy varies a little bit regionally. He has many different names, but he is a lot more benevolent up Russian north and in Belarus, a strict and demanding master, but with good intentions. The further south you go, and especially in East Ukraine, he is still a representation of dead ancestors, but a lot more angry and a little bit more malicious. That actually makes him closer to a different creature that doesn't exist in the southern parts, and that's a creature called Kikimara. Kikimara, another house spirit, is definitely malicious. She appears as a curse or in houses that sit on bad ground. She is described as this old hag, humpbacked, ugly, dressed in rags. If Kikimara appears in your house, she won't let you be. She breaks the pots, she screams, she makes noises, she kind of tears up your spinning, sometimes she rips your hair right out, essentially drives you mad. She especially likes playing with the spinning and the knitting, and she's terrible at both. Kikimara also has the same premonition ability as Domovoy. She only appears before a death in the family or some other dark event. In the house, she hides in the same places as Domovoy. I don't know what that arrangement looks like and why Domovoy doesn't help against her. Your best bet against her is prayer or cursing if you actually see her. To get rid of her is quite difficult. There are some rituals that you can perform, but mostly if she was put on your house as a curse, you're supposed to find that doll that the warlock hid somewhere around your house and get rid of it. And while Domovoy and his various variants look after the house and the stables, there is one more building on the property, the unholy one, Banya. Banya, a steam bath, a sauna-type building, was not sanctified as the house was, so it was imagined as this hotbed for evil spirits. Banya is a place where all of these unholy rituals are performed, such as divinations, any other magic rituals, as well as childbirths. Since anything sexual was kind of taboo and deemed dirty, so births were also this unclean event. The master of the banya is a spirit called Bannik, as you can see derived from banya, and he was imagined as this huge man with dark hair, bulging eyes, and always barefoot. He lives behind the stove in the banya or sometimes under the floorboards. Bannik is malicious. He tends to scare people having a bath, like banging on walls, screaming, laughing, calling out their names and such. He also can be more dangerous than that, especially if you break the rules. Like, for example, you're not supposed to heat up the banya on holidays or during the night, as it is Bannik's time to take a bath. Same with the rule of the third steam. You're not supposed to go into the banya when it was heated up for the third time in a row, or you're not supposed to enter the banya without a prayer, or you're not supposed to sleep in there. Break those rules and Bannik might just suffocate you, rip your skin right off, or drown you in the water barrel. Bannik has a female counterpart called Abdiriha from Abdirat, rip off. A big woman with big teeth, bulging eyes, and long hair. She lives either under a bench or under the ceiling, and as the name suggests, she will rip your skin right off. To protect yourself against these spirits, you simply need to follow the rules, ask permission to enter and such. One last thing to mention before we leave the courtyard of the village house is that all of these spirits have tales of them stealing newborn babies. All of these spirits love stealing unbaptized babies and sometimes impregnating women and then stealing the babies, so just be careful around that lot. And now we've entered the village, what awaits us there? Let's start with witches and warlocks, shall we? Witches are as old as time, aren't they? In Russian they're called ведьма, from the word ведать, know. In Old Rus, witches were essentially all women with some level of magic knowledge, whether they used it for the good or the bad, to heal or to curse. Most of this lore should be familiar to you because it's quite similar to the European lore on witches. There are witches born and witches of the book. Witches born are normally either the third generation of illegitimate children or when a family has like 5 generations of girls born into it. Witches of the book need to renounce Christ and sell their soul to the devil by performing a blasphemy. Witches are said to have a tail, and that's how you recognize them. And yes, they were burnt at stakes. What do witches do? Well, they curse your livestock and your crops. They steal your milk and your grain. Any your misfortune, you can confidently blame it on the witches. The witch harms in a wide variety of ways. She causes damage to people and livestock, sends diseases, scares and suffocates people, upsets weddings, and brings discord into the family. What do witches do in their leisure time between cursing children and sending locusts on fields? They fly to the demonic Sabbath, of course. A famous location is the Bald Mountain near Kiev. In order to get there, witches lathe themselves with a special solve and fly there. This tradition is wonderfully executed in the Master and Margarita when Margarita becomes a witch. At Sabbath, witches dance, they party, they drink with demons, and receive instructions directly from Satan. Sounds rather fun, doesn't it? There are a variety of ways of recognizing witches, none too helpful today, and some amulets that would protect you against them, also nothing particularly exciting, so let's get to the warlocks. Warlocks, or kolduni, well, male counterparts to witches have a slightly different image to them. Shall we call them warlocks or kolduni? I don't know. Let's stick with kolduni, how about that? Kolduni are likely the spiritual descendants of Volch, the pagan priests, so kolduni can do both good and bad, while witches are mostly stuck with the bad. Patriarchy, man. But they were also burned for their magic, so that's equal opportunity at least. Geographically, kolduni are much more represented up north, there are fewer witches up there, while you go south in Belarus and the Ukraine, there are about the same number of kolduni and witches, and they're about equally powerful. Appearance-wise, kolduni are either humpbacked, or limp, or blind, or simply have one left arm. They also have either black or red eyes. Just like witches, they are kolduni born and kolduni of the book, and they generally occupy themselves with the same thing as witches. Attack livestock and crops, break up weddings, apparently a specialty of theirs. They can put a love spell on you, or the other way around, or they can also fortune tell. The way to recognize a koldun is pretty much the same as with a witch, but if you ever meet one on the road, you're not supposed to look him in the eye, and you're supposed to make a rude gesture like this. I haven't done this since middle school. There are certain rules to how you bury a koldun once he dies, otherwise he might just well come back as an upir. Upir is a creature very similar to a vampire, this walking dead, or undead if you will, who at night raises from his grave, attacks livestock or people, and drinks their blood. But he drinks it straight from the heart and not from the neck, as modern vampires do. Upir looks just like the deceased, wearing his same clothes, but he also has red eyes and sometimes a tail. Upir is also a shapeshifter. He can turn into a bat or a cat. During the day, he lies in his grave. One book suggested that he's smoking a pipe down there, but in the night he rises from his grave, returns home, and sucks the blood of his victims. There are rather creepy tales of upirs coming back to their wives and even having kids with them. But on a slightly lighter note, the way to get rid of them is to surprise and confuse them with something that is not supposed to happen in real life. Where are you going? Not far from here, the neighbors. Their brother is marrying his sister. How can it be that the brother marries a sister? But how can it be that the dead come to the living? Then the dead slammed his palm on the table so that everything in the house shook. You're lucky you figured it out, or I'd have strangled you. He turned around, went out into the courtyard. A whirlwind rose behind him, and he did not return. The sure way to get rid of him is still, however, stake through the heart or to cut off his head. Upirs can be these dead kolduni, but also men who have died before their time or an unnatural death. There is this belief that every single man has a certain amount of time allocated to them, so if they die before that, they cannot rest. So they rise and disturb the living, kind of sucking the life out of them that they never got to live. That's normally your suicide victims, but also those who have died from essentially accidents. So some can come back as upirs, but otherwise, under specific circumstances, they can come back as rusalkas. Rusalkas are women who have died an unnatural or premature death, most often from drowning, but it also just can be unmarried maidens. A bit of a lore here. The word Rusalka also means mermaid these days, so a little bit of confusion arises, because when you say Rusalka, people think of a Little Mermaid, popularized by Hans Christian Andersen, and not Disney. Slavic Rusalka, however, doesn't have a fishtail. There is a different creature that does have a fishtail that's called Pharaonka, and it's completely gone from the public memory. I only learned about it when I was researching for this video, and it's the wildest origin story ever. Pharaonka is derived from the word pharaon, pharaoh, so they were imagined as these pharaohs that Moses drowned in the sea, and they were cursed for all eternity and grew fishtails, and apparently switched genders as well. There are even abominations of Pharaoh's horses who also grew fishtails. It's wild. But we're here to talk about Rusalkas. Rusalkas, as I said, are normally young, beautiful women, in big thanks to Gogol and his interpretation of them in May's Night, I think. So they are beautiful young women wearing white dresses. White was a mourning color for a long time. They're not wearing the belt, which is essentially the same thing as not wearing a cross, meaning unbaptized. And they also have long, flowy hair, either light brown or green. That's also how unmarried women were buried, with their hair not tied. But also this flowy, long hair is a very sexually charged image. Their bodies are also very white, almost see-through, and their eyes kind of dull and unmoving. They live in any body of water, a river or lake, sometimes even wells. Rusalkas were often seen sitting on a rock or a log by the water, brushing their hair. On Rusalne week, the week before Pentecost, Rusalkas come out of the water and go into the woods and the fields, apparently to dance around, run around, maybe form a haravot, this circle dance, or they sometimes even build something akin to swings in the trees to swing around. That's probably why in Pushkin's poem Rusalka is sitting in the tree, not necessarily her natural habitat. Meeting a Rusalka always means trouble. They want to kill you. The preferred method is actually tickling their victim to death. But in a pinch, they will also pinch you, strangle you, or drown you, the most obvious one. Rusalkas also prefer young male victims. They either lure them into the water or invite them to swing in the trees with them. Swinging in the tree branches is somewhat of a euphemism here. After such an encounter, no mortal woman can compare, and so the man just simply withers away. There are rituals performed to banish a Rusalka. On Rusalne week, it's also prudent to stay away from bodies of water in the forest. But if you ever meet one, she fears the Holy Cross, a prayer, or swear words. I just love the image of using all three at once, like you're waving a Holy Cross in her face, like «Иди на небеси, Иди на небеси». Can you tell that I do not know a single prayer? Rusalka is not the only creature that lives in the water. The master of that domain is called Vodyanoy. Derived from Vada, water, Vodyanoy lives in lakes and rivers and ponds, and he is the master of that domain. We're back from those restless undead and back to the spirits and the masters of specific locations. Vodyanoy looks like an old man with a huge belly, often naked and covered in mud and grass. Sometimes he takes on the traits of the fish and the animals. Sometimes he has a fish tail or a fish face, sometimes duck feet or a horn. This one is hella creepy, but I love the one from a Soviet cartoon where he sings a little song about how nobody wants to be friends with him. I probably cannot play any of it for you, otherwise Soyuz Multfilm is gonna be on my ass. He lives in deep parts of ponds and lakes, but also sometimes near water wells, not only because that's where his victims are, but maybe also because he likes to use the watermill as a Ferris wheel. Watermills were actually considered like demonic places in grand parts thanks to the offerings and sacrifices made to Vodyanoy, a black rooster and vodka. Yum. Vodyanoy is malicious. In some parts he's straight up called a demon. He lures people in and drowns them. He's also tricky. He is a shapeshifter, so he sometimes pretends to be a drowning person or a child. He tips boats over, or he turns into a big fish and just drags fishermen in. I now like to pretend that the big fish in Hemingway's story was just a Vodyanoy and that old man had no chance. Vodyanoy is most dangerous near holidays like Ivan Kupala or Pentecost, and that's why it was forbidden to swim then. Not to fall his victim, you need to follow the rules of swimming in open waters, just like don't swim in the dark and such. He also doesn't like whistling, but be careful with that, it just might make him angry. Just like Domovoy had variants that lived in the stables, for example, Vodyanoy has a variant called Bolotnik that lives in a bog, or a marsh or a swamp or a fen. You have far too many words for different types of what we call bolota. Bolotnik serves the same function. He lures his victim into the bog or a marsh and drowns them there. Getting out of the swamp and into the field, we encounter a different spirit called Polivoy. Polivoy is less known now, he was mostly left behind. He was imagined as this tall man with fiery fur who ran across the field at noon or on especially hot days. He ran so fast that he appeared as this quickly passing sparkle, and he brought the wings along with him. He is the master of the field, so he looks after the crops and the livestock that feeds there, but he's also cranky and easily angered, so he might just send insects to bite your cows, or he'll send the rain away, or he will make you walk around in circles in the field, or at the extreme, he might just give you a sunstroke. To appease him, you will leave him small offerings of food. But Polivoy has a female counterpart called Poludnitsa, from the word poldzin, noon, and she essentially serves the same function as Polivoy. She is this tall woman in a sparkling white dress. In some tales, she's brandishing a frying pan to boink you over the head if you misbehave. But in other tales, she has these huge breasts, sometimes made of iron, but huge nevertheless, so much so that she can throw them over her shoulder, and she can knock you out using her tits. And I think that's beautiful. But let's get into the shade before that happens and meet the last of our master spirits, the master of the forest, called Leshy. Most often, Leshy appears as an old man with a white beard, dressed as any other peasant, but something being wrong, like he has shoes on the wrong feet, or he doesn't wear a belt. Often, to show his connection to the forest, he's imagined as being covered in pine bark or alternatively fur. There are some other oddities. Some say that he doesn't cast a shadow or that he has blue blood. His dimensions also vary. Sometimes he's regular human size, other times he's as tall as trees, and other times he's as small as a child. He is also a shapeshifter. He can turn into any animal that lives in his forest, but he also can turn into any human, often appearing to people as their friends or family. His general attitude towards humans is debated. Some view him as a total demonic creature. Others just designate him as the strict master of his domain who chastises those who break the rules. Main thing that Leshy does to humans is he gets them lost, which could potentially be quite dangerous. He makes them go around in circles or leads them into the deepest parts of the forest, or he causes small mischief like he steals their bags or makes them fall asleep on an anthill. This type of thing happens to those who break the rules of entering the forest, like entering it without a cross, without a prayer, or asking permission from Leshy. Don't you just love how these pagan rituals mix with the Christian ones? Also, on that note, the forest retains some of those prehistoric beliefs, as in the forest is a different world, the upside down, the underworld. And so if Leshy leads you astray and leads you into the dark recesses of the forest, what you need to do is you need to put your clothes on backwards, put the cross on your back, and put the shoes on the wrong feet, kind of playing into this upside-downedness of the forest, and then you can get out. Your amulet against Leshy is Salt and Fire. A magical cross might do. Swearing and praying might chase him off as well. But in general, if you are respectful, if you don't take more than you need from the forest and kind of don't break any rules set by Leshy, he'll let you be. And these are the main characters of the East Slav lower mythology that I wanted to talk to you about today. I so wanted to talk about Siren and Alkanost because I love this painting by Kuznetsov, but they are Greek mythology, so I cannot. I actually debated if I should include this lower mythology in this video or make it a separate one. This video is long enough as it is, but what tipped the scale is one fact and one fact alone. Mythology in general helped the man understand the world and, if not make it safer, but at least put some guardrails in place. That's why so many of the spirits have clauses built into them. If you don't do this, this, and this, it won't touch you. It's that cognitive bias. If you do everything right, the bad thing won't happen to you. That's not how it works. It's very easy to explain and rationalize these creatures and spirits as anxieties and or things that a man cannot explain. Rusalka personifies the fear of drowning. Abziricha is just a heat stroke that you get if you stay in the sauna for too long. And a witch is a easy enough creature to blame all of your misfortunes on. It's very understandable. In the same way that the pagan gods represented these forces outside of a human's control, normally to do with the weather and the elements. And so offerings and sacrifices to these gods were these futile attempts at protecting yourself against those elements. But the thing is that these plots, these anxieties, these fears, they don't go away. They just simply transform. I intentionally skipped this part of mythology before anthropomorphic gods, where people worshipped animals and the spirits of the river and such, mostly because I feel like we know even less about it now and it's more part of folklore than any cohesive mythology. But there is one example that I want to bring up here. There are different stories attached to the animals, and just like the lion is the king of the jungle, which is not even true, lions do not live in jungles, the king of the forest is the bear. He is probably the most dangerous animal that you meet around these parts, and so the hunters worshipped him and left him small offerings and sacrifices, like for example, they left their first kill for the bear so that he doesn't come out and eat them all. This same role as the master of the forest then transferred to Veles, who was either himself a shapeshifter and can turn into the bear, or he always had a bear at his side, like this furry familiar. Sacrifices were made to him by hunters in the same manner, but then Veles also got banned and gone, and who replaced him? Leshy did. The same role as the master of the forest, and still small offerings made to him to appease him. This same thing happens with a different creature. Women are not supposed to leave their spinning out for the night, otherwise Kikimara might just stir it up because she wants to finish it for you, but she's terrible at these womanly skills. But that's the same thing that Mokosh does, or Saint Paraskieva, it's just that Kikimara is a little bit more straightforward in her methods of making women clean up their workspaces at the end of the day. These same motifs appear again and again and again, no matter what stage of the evolution of mythology we're at. Whether we worship animals, pagan gods, Christian saints, or we fear the demons, they all play the same role. And that's the role of explaining something that we have no explanations for. That's probably the reason why Polivik is mostly gone from the public memory. Not only because we work less in the fields now and use heavier machinery for that, but also because we can pretty much confidently say that he was simply a sunstroke personified. At the same time, the image of Rusalka remains because people still disappear. They still drown in rivers, so why not attach an imagery to it? Even I do not believe in these creatures. But last time I talked about Kikimaras and Domovoy in one of my Halloween videos, there were noises coming in from my kitchen and things have gone missing right after. Same thing happened as I was scripting for this video. One night, a book fell over and knocked a heavy candle off of the shelf and woke me up. I was scared shitless. Obviously, it's all a coincidence, but with a little bit of magical thinking, and here I am apologizing to my Domovoy for angering him. I actually did apologize last time. And that's why I loved doing research for this video and reading all of these different stories attached to these creatures and what they might mean. And that's why it's so sad that we know so little about those pagan gods, and not because neo-pagans don't have anybody to worship. They have the Book of Veles for that. Let me know if you found this video interesting. I also thought about doing a video on Russian heroic epos. I think that could be fun as well. You know what else I learned? Russian folk songs have this motif in them that repeats from time to time. Oi luli mai luli, oi luli luli, something like that. I think even Tchaikovsky sampled one of them for his concertos or something. But this oi luli luli, it's basically a bastardized hallelujah.